And there are various ways in which organisms are active in reproduction. They're active in different ways in how they approach a mate. Some organisms are sessile, meaning they don't move. Well, how in the world do you find a mate if you're stuck in one place and your mate is stuck in one place? Some organisms solve this problem by growing out towards their mates. For example, there are a number of fungi that are stuck in one place. They grow in one place, but they send out hyphae, little tubes, that reach out towards a nearby fungi, and they trade genetic material through these tubes. So that's one way to do that. Another way to solve this problem is actually to send out what we call sex cells or gametes. They send out sperm and they send out eggs that can swim. And the eggs and sperm swim towards each other. So whereas the parents are stuck in place and can't reach each other in any way, the sperm and the egg can swim together, can mate, and produce offspring in that fashion. Other organisms are more mobile. They can move around, but they have to still find their mate. Well, how do you find the male or female of the same species? Some do this by attracting the potential mate to themselves. For example, female butterflies will send out special what's called pheromones. These are chemicals that float around in the air and are detected by the male butterflies. Male butterflies can not just pick up this wonderful scent from the female, but they can fly around and figure out where the scent is more is at a higher concentration and move in the direction of the female and eventually find the female in this fashion. Other organisms attract their mate by sound. So you've heard the sound of crickets at night, or tree frogs, bullfrogs, songbirds. Many of those songs are designed to attract a mate. The mate recognizes the song of a particular of their species and moves towards the mate to find their mate in that fashion. Other organisms attract their mate by light. Fireflies, for example, flash on and off, indicating to another individual where they're at, and that individual flies in to mate with them. Others they have dances that they're trying to show off to their mate. We see this in various birds. The peacock, for example, shows the beauty of his tail to the peahen. Spiders often dance to attract their mate. And if you got, I guess, the best looking dance, you draw your mate in that fashion. So various organisms are given various types of activity to draw their mate in. And then once the mate comes near, we now have to be able to sexually mate with the mate. You have to mix the sex cells, the sperm and the eggs, and that's done in a variety of ways. God has created a variety of ways for the sperm from the male and the eggs from the female to mix. For example, in honeybees, the female honeybee will fly to a location where there's a bunch of males flying in the air. Males are called drones. She'll fly through that group or herd of drones, and along the way they will mate with her in flight while she's flying. And when she mates with a male, she rips out the intestines of the male, including a bag of sperm, and inserts that bag into her body. And she might do that for 4 or 5 guys, and then fly back to the hive, and she'll hold that sperm for the rest of her life. For 4 to 5 years, she will have these bags of sperm. By the way, that kills the males. Males drop out of the sky dead when this happens. She'll hold those bags of sperm for the rest of her life. Whenever she wants to lay an egg, she'll decide whether she wants that egg fertilized. If she does, she opens up one of those sacs, lets a sperm out to mate, to fertilize one of her eggs, and she then lays a fertilized egg. That's an interesting way, bizarre. A pseudoscorpion picks up a sperm sac So the male leaves a sperm sac, doesn't hurt him, he just leaves his sperm sac there and goes away. The female comes along, picks up the sperm sac, and she carries that for some time to come to fertilize her eggs. Male limulids, the horseshoe crabs, the female will lay eggs and go away. The male will come in and put the sperm on top of the eggs to fertilize the eggs. And of course, in the case of mammals, the male actually injects the sperm into the body of the female so that her eggs can get fertilized. And there's a variety of other ways of doing it. It's interesting that God has created a wide variety of ways for the gametes or sex cells from two different individuals to experience fertilization. And then there's various ways by which the young develop and are birthed, if you wish. Tilapia, the fish tilapia, perhaps you've eaten that from time to time. The eggs of tilapia are picked up in the mouth of the tilapia, and they're hatched in the mouth and raised in the mouth. You got to stop swallowing, here, and then released or birthed out of the mouth of the tilapia fish. In the case of seahorses, the male takes the eggs that are generated by the female and puts them in a pouch. And they're raised in a pouch. And then when the time comes, he births the young out of the pouch. And of course, you know of birds that lay eggs, and then the female and sometimes the male, both of them, or alternately male and female, sit on the eggs to keep them warm until they finally hatch. In the case of mammals, you've got two methods there. One set of mammals, the marsupials, have the young develop to a certain very early stage, usually something that's very, very small, about a half-inch long, and birth the baby at that point. The little baby crawls through the hair of the mom and finds a pouch on her and crawls into the pouch and is raised for the rest of the development in that pouch. In the case of placental mammals, the rest of the mammals, the young is actually raised inside the mom for the duration of the development and is birthed as a much more developed individual. There's also a variety of ways in which organisms feed their young once the young are birthed. You're familiar with songbirds that have eggs in a nest, and the eggs hatch, and then the songbirds go out, get food, and feed the little babies in that fashion. You got also examples of other organisms that mammals in particular will nurse their young through giving their young milk through breasts. There's then later, when they are able to fend for themselves a little bit, some of the parents will in fact teach the young how to eat. And that's really the way raccoons do it. In other cases, the parents bring the food to the young. For example, the lions might kill their food and then bring it to the food. But there's, again, a variety of ways that organisms feed their young. Besides various ways of reproduction, God has placed a whole bunch of different ways for organisms to find resources, to find food, to find water. Some organisms grow to get to again, sessile organisms that can't move. Trees grow their roots out to the water. They grow their roots to the nutrients. Fungi grow their hyphae out to water and nutrients. Other organisms are able to move towards water, towards light that they might, if they need light, toward nutrients if they need nutrients. Some of them do it simply by detecting what they want, like let's say sharks. Sharks detect a small amount of blood in the water, and they begin circling around to figure out in what direction does the blood concentration increase. When they figure that out, they move in that direction to find the source of the blood and thus find their food in that fashion. Other organisms are a little more sophisticated in getting their food. They might trap their food. The antlions, for example, will dig a hole in sand. It'll end up a pyramid-shaped hole, and ants will come along. They'll fall into this trap. The antlion is waiting at the bottom of the trap with open mouth, and the ant falls right into the mouth of the antlion. Alligator snapping turtles do something similar. They sit there in the water, open their mouths, and have their tongue. At the end of their tongue is something that kind of looks like a little worm dangling at the end of his tongue. So he sticks out his tongue and wiggles that. It makes it look like there's a worm in the water. Fish comes by to eat the worm. As soon as the fish comes into the vicinity of the alligator snapping turtle's mouth, he bites down on the fish and eats the fish in that fashion. Other organisms sneak up on their prey. They stalk their prey. They attack it in that fashion. The praying mantis, for example, moves extremely slowly until he finally gets close enough to grab a cricket or whatever he's going after and then chew it in that sense. And of course, you're probably familiar with the lions that sneak up on their prey and at the last minute jump their prey, try to outrun their prey. Other organisms use tools to get what they need. There are ants that actually use the spongy portions of some plants as like little sponges. They will use that to soak up water and then carry the water back to their nest. Or put those sponges in the body of a dead organism and soak up the body fluids and take that back to their nests. Some organisms will in fact use twigs. There's some birds that'll pick up twigs and stick them in holes to get insects out. Other organisms use cooperation to get what they need. Pelicans, for example, get together as a group, surround a school of fish, corral that school into smaller and smaller area, and then just scoop up all the fish when they've got them all in one small area. Perhaps my favorite example here are the honey guides, which is a type of bird that likes to eat honey and other things associated with the beehive. When the honey guide bird recognizes a bee's nest, he will fly to a human village and notify the human village, and they've come to recognize the honey guides when they appear. The humans follow the honey guide to the nest. The humans break up the nest and get the honey that they need. What remains, the honey guide can consume. So there's one species using another species to help them get their food, collect the food that they want. There are other organisms that collect the water or the nutrients. They might store it. How they get it, that's interesting. Different organisms get their food and water in different ways. Elephants have a trunk that they can siphon the water or the food up into the trunk and then feed themselves from the trunk. There are other organisms there's certain insects like aphids that have the ability to puncture a plant and suck out the nutrients of the plant in that fashion. Fungi take in the nutrients from the outside and suck them in. They don't put the food inside their body. They actually digest the food on the outside of their body and then take the nutrients in. You got organisms that just swallow and can't chew, like reptiles, and you got other organisms that chew their food, like mammals. All sorts of different ways of collecting or processing their food and water. Some organisms store their food. They want it for a future, and they have ingenious devices to collect food for the winter or for the period of time that they're not going to have food. Corvids, for example, the crows and ravens, will collect food and then store it. They'll create hiding places for their food, places we call caches. They will cache food all over the place and go to find it later on. And of course, you're familiar with squirrels. Take nuts, bury them in the ground during the time that nuts are abundant. And then in times when they're not, like the winter, they'll go run around, find those nuts that they have buried, and be able to eat food all year round. Other organisms, interestingly enough, actually grow their food or culture their food. The leaf cutter ants, for example, that you might have seen videos of going through the forest carrying pieces of plants, of leaves. What are they doing? They're taking the leaves back to their nest. They're putting the leaves into a particular chamber in their nest, and they're raising fungi on the leaves. They eat the fungi. They're not really interested in the leaves. They're using the leaves to culture fungi that they can eat, which is really pretty clever, pretty interesting. So another type of thing that organisms are active in doing is defending themselves. Organisms are trying to avoid predators. For example, octopi have this amazing ability to slide through very fine slits. Even if their eye is, let's say, 2 inches in diameter, they can go through a slit that's half that size. They can actually squeeze down their eye to go through slits. And they also have the ability to, or they have programmed to go hide away from things that might find them. They also can change color to match their environment. In fact, whereas chameleons kind of change a general color that matches the background, it's amazing how octopi can change to very fine detail. For example, if you lay out a checkerboard on the bottom of the ocean, an octopus on top of the checkerboard will reproduce the checkerboard pattern in great detail and just disappear into the environment in that fashion. Other organisms are trying to get away. The squirrels and birds will often even be able to recognize such things as a shadow of a hawk that's moving across the landscape, and run, scatter when they see it. In fact, if you take a kite or make a kite that has a long extension on one side, a shorter extension on another, and what looks like wings in between, if you run the kite in one direction, it looks like a long-necked goose flying through the air, at least in its shadow. If you run the kite in the other direction, it looks like a hawk. And if you run the kite in one direction, you'll find all the animals scurrying to disappear. You run the kite in the other direction, they don't mind the shadow as it goes across them. So you got organisms that are designed to run away under the right circumstances. Other organisms, they're not so interested in running away. They just want to scare the organism that is about to eat them. Cecropia moths have large eye spots on their wings. So if their wings are closed up and something comes at them, like a bird is starting to dive down, they'll open up their wings. 2 eyes will appear. It might actually scare the potential predator into thinking there's a really big animal down there that I don't want to get close to. Bombardier beetles have 2 chemicals that when something comes along like a frog that wants to eat them, they'll shoot those 2 chemicals together into the mouth of the frog. The 2 chemicals combine chemically to produce a substance that emits an awful lot of heat, very similar to boiling water, which discourages a frog from ever trying to eat a bombardier beetle. You've got other organisms like rattlesnakes that warn the organism that's nearby by rattling, and thus scaring away, or hopefully scaring away, something that might hurt them. Other organisms carry protection. They don't actually produce protection on their own, but they carry something that protects themselves. Hermit crabs, for example, don't have shells, but they pick up shells. They like picking up snail shells and hauling them around, thus protecting them from things that might eat them from above. Other organisms actually carry things to protect themselves in an offensive manner. For example, other organisms grow things that protect themselves. Mollusks, snails will develop shells that protect themselves. You've got organisms that deceive other organisms. Possums think it's a great idea to play dead. Organisms that are playing with a possum and the possum all of a sudden plays dead. Many organisms will they'll lose interest in the possum. It's a curious thing. But there's a number of organisms that if they come across a dead animal, they will not touch it. They will not eat it because they've been programmed to, I guess, understand that a dead animal might have died of a disease. And if they eat that animal, they might actually succumb to the same kind of disease. So many organisms, if they encounter another animal that's dead, they won't have anything to do with it. And so that's what possums are in part trying to take advantage of. Other organisms are designed to fight. Bees can sting, birds can peck, rodents can bite, cats can scratch to protect themselves from being killed or harmed. Other organisms use tools to protect themselves. One of my favorites are little crabs that pick up sea anemones. Sea anemones are animals that are rather voracious things. They eat other things quite readily. So a crab will pick up a sea anemone and stick it on its claws. And when an animal comes along to try to eat the crab will in fact point the sea anemones towards the animal that's trying to attack them, thus protecting themselves by using another organism. There's even a Capuchin monkey that saw a snake and picked up a stick and beat the snake to death with the stick. So some organisms can use tools to protect themselves as well. Others cooperate among and between themselves to protect themselves. There's a set of caterpillars, for example, that if they're ever approached or attacked by a bird, all the caterpillars of that species will line up in the same direction towards the bird and all regurgitate at the same time, thus throwing an obnoxious mess at the bird, and the bird is then distracted from eating the caterpillars. You've got prairie dogs that bark to warn other prairie dogs that something is coming, and all the prairie dogs cooperate in such a way. It's kind of an interesting thing. If you ever walk through a prairie dog town, a bunch of their holes, you'll have prairie dogs when you first approach. The only prairie dogs that are barking are on the edge of the town closest to you. As you get closer to them, they shut up, and prairie dogs further away will bark. And so you can actually tell where a person is in the midst of the prairie dog town by listening where the barking is. The barking will isolate where the organism is that's walking through the town. And in that way, prairie dogs can actually protect themselves from organisms that are going through their town. There are various ways in which organisms locomote, move around. Some organisms move around with flagella or tails. Some organisms move around by cilia, which are basically like little oars that move in unison, thus moving the organism through the water. Other organisms deform and take on a different shape, reach out, grab on, and pull themselves forward through what's called pseudopods. Other organisms move through the water by undulation. Other organisms pull in water and squirt water out, propelling themselves through the water by jet propulsion. Other organisms climb, some organisms glide, some fly. Some dig, some swim, some walk. There's a variety of ways in which organisms locomote. Probably one of the most fascinating examples or amazing examples of locomotion are examples of migration. There's seasonal migration, where organisms on a seasonal basis move from one place to another. The gray whale probably wins the prize here. It moves more than 10,000 kilometers every season from one place to another place and back again each year. Birds, bats, many of them move from North America to South America on a seasonal basis. Then there are other organisms that don't migrate every year or every season. They might migrate once a year. For example, the coho salmon will be born upstream in a stream, live for several years in the stream, then begin a long journey down the stream to the ocean, to a particular place in the ocean where other salmon live for several years. And then when it's ready, it will swim back again up that same stream, back to that same starting place where it was born, spawn with another salmon, lay eggs, and die. They will do that once a lifetime and move a considerable distance. Monarch butterflies do this themselves once a year. 4,000 kilometers will be the flight path of monarch butterflies. Some organisms move up-down, and it's interesting, God's designed a variety of ways for organisms to tell which way's up. How do you know which way's up? If you want to go up and down, you need to know which way is up. Some organisms simply detect a greater brightness, especially organisms that live in water. If you live deeper in the water, it's darker. Higher in the water, it's lighter. So if you move towards the greater brightness, you're generally moving upward. Many species use that particular method, but there's some other ones that are really wild. A fly, for example, is well known. All the flies, in fact, have only 2 wings. Most insects have 4 wings. The fly has 2. In the place where the other 2 wings would be, right behind the first 2, there are some little stubs there that look like maybe they're failed attempts at growing wings, but actually they turn out to be gyroscopes, things that humans invented not really very long ago to orient themselves or keep themselves in such an orientation that they can remember which way is up, like an airplane. You really need to know which way is up in an airplane. If you're in the middle of a cloud, you better not mess that up, because you might end up plowing yourself into the ground. So gyroscopes have been invented to determine exactly what the horizontal is. Flies have gyroscopes built into them, so they can fly along just below the ceiling and then all of a sudden flip upside down and land on the ceiling. It's just amazing design. Other organisms, they tell which way is up by using gravity. They just have basically little objects that are rolling around in their cells. So whichever way is down, the objects roll to that side of the cell, so the organism knows which way is down. And they can then infer, of course, which way is up. Many corals, mollusks, echinoderms, crustaceans, many sea creatures actually use this method of determining which way up is up and down. Other organisms use the compass to determine, or some sort of a compass, to determine direction. Some organisms migrate to the south, to the north. Well, they got to know which way is south and north. Some of them use the stars, the motion of the stars. Those that fly at night, for example, use the position of stars to determine which way is north, realizing that the stars don't move that are at the North Pole. Other stars do move. These birds take advantage of the motion of stars through the night to determine which way is north and south. Other organisms use the sun. If you've got a patch of blue, you can tell by using polarized light, you can determine which direction the sun is. You don't have to actually have direct view of the sun. You just need a little patch of blue to determine what direction the light is bouncing in order to determine where the sun really is. So some insects, like honeybees, can actually look at a patch of blue, and their eyes are designed in such a way that they can determine the direction that the light has bounced to get to their eye, and they can then infer the position of the sun, and they move according to the position of the sun. Other organisms use actually little compasses. They've got little crystals of iron that are magnetized inside their cells. The crystals will line up with the Earth's magnetic field and tell the organism which way is north, which way is south. Pretty amazing ways in which God has given organisms the ability to orient themselves. There are various ways in which organisms locate other organisms. Let's say you're a tick. You're interested in landing on an animal to draw its blood. You're interested in a warm-blooded animal, so ticks are actually designed with the ability to feel the heat that rises from a mammal. When they feel the heat of a mammal that's walking underneath them, they jump off the leaf and jump onto the animal, and they've found their animal in that fashion. Other organisms find another animal by chemicals, like the pheromones used by butterflies to find their mates. Others use sound, others use vibration. For example, spiders create a spider web, and they keep feet on various strings of the spider web, threads of the spider web. When an animal impacts the spider web and moves it, the spider can feel among the threads, determine where that animal is, and run and get that animal in that fashion. Others use electric fields, because living organisms, produce electric fields. So some animals actually detect the electric fields of other organisms and go after them and eat them accordingly. Some of the electric fish, for example, will in fact detect organisms in this fashion. The platypus, that bill-shaped thing in front of the platypus's head there, is able to detect electric fields of organisms underneath the mud at the bottom of a creek and find the organisms in that fashion. Other organisms use sound, like echolocation of whales and porpoises, to find organisms. There's truly an amazing variety of ways in which God has given organisms the ability to move, and organisms are truly active in a variety of fashions. Some don't look like they're active, all the way to organisms that are extremely active. There is, in fact, a spectrum of perfection of activity in biological organisms that points to the infinite activity of God.